and welcome to What's On at Cineworld Cinemas, where we go through what's currently on the silver screen and talk about the latest news from Hollywood. I'm Luke Owen, living in a twilight world, and I'm joined by my only friend at dusk, Laurie Blake.
And coming up on the show, we have a spoiler-free discussion about Christopher Nolan's new time-bending movie Tenet before diving into spoiler-filled territory.
So make sure you've seen the movie before watching that bit of the show. Book your tickets in the video description down below.
And we'll be having a chat about the trailers from DC Fandom,
including a new look at Wonder Woman 84, which is out this year, and next year's big releases of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad and Matt Reeves' The Batman. He is Vengeance. So, Laurie, our big movie release this week, of course, it's the film we've been building up to since Cineworld reopened its cinema doors. Christopher Nolan's Tenet, which is now out in cinemas now. You can book tickets for that in the video description down below. This is going to be our spoiler-free section of the show. We are going to do a spoiler-filled version a little bit down the line, but for now, we're just going to keep things spoiler-free. Laurie, what did you make of the movie?
Loved it, mate. I loved it. I thought it was, Christopher Nolan's obsessed with time, and Tenet takes that to just in a completely different direction. If Memento's about the fragmentation of time, and Interstellar's about time dilation, and Dunkirk is just about the amount of time you can spend on a beach, Tenet is about, it's about how time flows. And I think what's so amazing is that doesn't actually play into the opening portion of the film as much as I was kind of expecting it to. It's really like, it's subtly set up. It's like played with a little bit. And then at the end, this film really goes off the rails on like what can possibly happen with these two interlinking bits of time. Like what's interesting about it is that, like, to me, this is like a Bond film, right? This is Christopher Nolan just going, I'm just going to make a Bond film, and it's just going to be John David Washington is playing the protagonist. He's Bond. There's a meeting with a Q-like character who explains all the time inversion stuff, which is where objects get their entropy reversed and they're flowing backwards through time. So they're experiencing, we see them as flowing backwards, but they're experiencing time forwards, but they're just going the other way. It's mental. But it's all spycraft and subterfuge, and I really, really got into all of that stuff. Before it went complete, the sci-fi stuff is great. I love the sci-fi stuff. I love the kind of the playing with physics and reality here, but just the level to which he's kind of nailed on the James Bond-esque spycraft. Because there was a trailer for No Time to Die that I saw just before the film went on, and I was like, wow, Bond's coming back. That's going to be great. And then they just did a Bond film, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was the case here. It was so brilliant. I really, really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it really felt like a mix between Inception and Interstellar, because it has all of the timey-wimey, here's some sciencey stuff of Interstellar, and just here's how time travel could possibly work, and physics and sort of, explanation stuff. And the audience again, they're going, okay, yeah, I think I'll follow along. And it's coupled with all of the scenes from Inception where people sit around in a room and be like, and this is how we're going to use it to do a heist. Mm-hmm. and that's just sort of one aspect of it. I think the trailers have been they've been purposefully vague, because we as an audience go on the journey with the protagonist, John David Washington, and we learn along with him. The trailers are basically, they're not explaining what Tenet means. They're not explaining anything really. They're not explaining how sort of the time inversion stuff works. So you as an audience member get to go on this journey along with the protagonist. And that's really good. Also, I think for the record as well, we're not being pretentious douchebags by calling the lead character the protagonist. This is literally the character's name.
Yeah, he doesn't have a name.
No, they are referred to him as the protagonist. And I really, really dug that. I thought it was a lot of fun to kind of go through that. The first hour is really, really great. The stuff with between John David Washington and Robert Pattinson getting about Robert Pattinson, by the way, I thought was fantastic in this movie. Thought he was John David Washington was brilliant, as was Elizabeth Debicki, but man, Robert Pattinson was so good. Kenneth Branagh as the villain just was I thought they did so much cool stuff in this.
I mean, the cast is amazing. John David Washington is basically like non-emoting his way through the film. He's such a hardened veteran that even when he's like shown bullets flying back into a gun, he's kind of like, "And where are these made?" Rather than being like, "What the hell just happened?" Like, you know, like he is so good, but his character's got like he's not suave in the way that James Bond would be. He's instead got this swagger to him. He's got this comfortability in these horrible situations that allows him to like play up to all these situations. There's a brilliant bit where one of these henchmen tries to pat him down and he's like, "Hey, you know, where I come from, you'd have to buy me dinner first." And there's all these kind of like little bits of interplay where you sort of see behind the curtain of who the protagonist actually is. Pattinson as Neil is he is the James Bond of this, really. He's the guy just keeping like a stiff upper lip and being very British about the entire thing all the way through with this, like the deeper it goes into secret bases and plots and whatever, you know, wherever this film takes you, he's just there sort of being like, "Whoa, should we have a cocktail?" Like, you know, but he is so brilliant in it, and there's so many depths to his character that you sort of discover as you go as well. Like he's clearly got bigger stakes in the game. Then you've got Kenneth Branagh's Andre Sator, who is the villain and really understated for a Branagh character. Like Kenneth Branagh, I feel like normally like brings like his Hercule Poirot. If that's him chewing the furniture, this is him. He nibbled a corner and put it back, trying to pass up. Like he's that sort of quiet monster in this film, and it is the moments where he gets angry are truly terrifying. Like he really does. Like, you know, he makes this whole speech at a later point in the film about basically like petting a tiger, and it's just immense encapsulation of what he thinks his character is. He thinks his character is something to be observed. And he does have this kind of serene grace of a tiger throughout the film, but then with these huge moments of ferocity. He's bloody brilliant. And so is Elizabeth Debicki as well as Kat, who is his wife, and they're a bit estranged, and she kind of ends up in a kind of mutually beneficial relationship with the protagonist, and she's clearly like she's the collateral, I would say, in this film, right? Like she's the kind of stakes for both the protagonist and for Sator, and she's got her own horse in the game. Like she really has like the weight of the world on her shoulders, and then they add the weight of the rest of the world as well. Like it's just mad. Like it's so clever, this film, the way like it's that thing that Nolan does very well, I think, of like, here's a really high concept, but I'm going to frame it around interpersonal drama. Like if Interstellar is about, you know, a family's sort of crossing through time, and Inception is about Leonardo DiCaprio's love for his wife, and the kind of like the processing of that, and Memento is about trying to find your way back to where you were. Like this is that same thing. It's about the ties that bind us into things, and how, like, you know, all we're ever looking for is escape and the ability to kind of do things differently. It's just really, really smart stuff. And I think you have to go into it with that headspace of like, I'm probably not going to get all of this.
Oh yeah,
I came out of it thinking, like, I don't think I got all of it, but I don't think you're supposed to. There are multiple points in which characters in the film will say, "Have you got all of that?" It's quite hard to understand. Are you keeping up? Like, I don't know. And they're obviously doing it in jest to John David Washington's character, but like they're clearly saying it to you as well. It's like, it's kind of like, it's fine if you don't get it, because if you get it too hard, you're going to start poking holes in it. And it's much better enjoyed with a little bit of suspension of disbelief and just enjoying the setup for what it is, because that setup leads you to some of the most staggering action set pieces I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think like this might come off as sort of like corporate shilling, but it really does feel like you need to see this film multiple times, which is why an unlimited card is very, very good. I got back from seeing this film. My wife said to me, "Did you enjoy it?" And I said, "Yeah, I really did." And she said, "Did you get it?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." Like there was multiple times in that movie I was like, "Nah, I don't think I'm particularly following what's going on here." But the more I've thought about it, the more I've been thinking about, like, not only do I want to go and see this film again because I want to like kind of Inception, I want to really get a good grip on this. I want to see it again because knowing sort of how the film is going to play out, I think there'll be multiple things that you'll notice sort of along the way to be like, what a lovely little bit of setup for the eventual payoff. I just thought of a moment then, we will come back to this, we'll come to that when we get to the spoiler section of this. But the other thing I wanted to say about the movie in this spoiler free area is we mentioned last week, or you mentioned last week, that it was all done practically. Like all of the effects were done practically, all the stunts are done practically, and this, that, and the other. And man, do you feel it? Like there are
Mhm.
certain moments during those like big set pieces where you're like, I can feel the weight of this and I can feel the impact of this. It's like it's stunning at times.
Yeah, I think there's a few action set pieces in this film that I think are going to be studied for years because they are so complex, not just in the way they happen in the first place, but as we'll get to in the spoiler bit, they happen again multiple times. Like there's this kind of, you see things from multiple perspectives, and like obviously that's kind of like the revealing of the past in the film, but like you see the same thing a few times from different perspectives, and it's like a lot of spy films and a lot of like heist films do that to be like, and I was here earlier, and that's when I put the thing in the cupboard that I would need later. And you kind of get those reveals as you go along in the big sort of like narrative. But this is literally people going back and walking, almost like walking through the same place, and you do just see it from this completely different perspective, and you understand a different part of the narrative than you did before, because there are moments in this film where people are going forwards and people are going backwards at the same time on the same screen, and you're seeing it from that perspective of like, well, this guy's going forwards, but I don't know what this guy going backwards is actually up to. And then
Yeah.
then it'll flip around and you see it the other way, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. But like, you then have to be like, well, I don't know how you did that. Like, if you have two parts of the scene going forwards and backwards, how do you film that? We've all made a student film in which someone like walks backwards a bit, like, and you reverse it to do something weird with those sorts of effects. This is taking that to like the nth degree, where stuff is blowing up in reverse motion and then being blown up in forwards motion a second later. It makes no sense.
Right. Well, I think we've covered everything that we possibly can in the spoiler-free section. So this is your spoiler warning. This is definitely the spoiler territory. Now, if you just want to hear us talk about the Batman trailer and you haven't seen Tenet yet, give a little skip across, but book your tickets down below to go see Tenet at Cineworld Cinemas. A hearty recommendation from, I believe, the both of us here.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really good movie. But yeah, let's dive into the spoiler-filled stuff in here, because I kind of talked about, those moments where you want to go see it again because you'll pick up on things. And I've been thinking about this since I came out the cinema. It's revealed at the end of the movie that Patterson's been in this way longer than we all thought that he had. Like there's a point in the middle of the movie when John David Washington's character realizes that Patterson knows about the time inversion stuff. And then it's revealed at the end of the movie that he had been hired by John David Washington in the future, and Patterson's essentially been working his way back through time to get to this point. And he's like, he said, like, for me, this is the end of a long, beautiful relationship, but for you, it's just the start. So that's quite lovely. And then you think back then to the first meeting they have in the movie, where he goes, I'll have a gin and tonic, he'll have a Coke.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's a Diet Coke, and the guy's like, oh no, I'd much prefer a soda water. And Rob Pattinson goes like, no, you wouldn't.
Yeah,
and
you think that's spy, and you think that's spycraft. You think that is intelligence.
Exactly, but actually knowing what you know at the end of the movie, you're like, oh, because he's known him for like decades and stuff. There's a lot in there to like really dive into.
Well, and this changes a lot of the, like that whole reframing changes a lot of your notions of what the spy stuff in the movie is, because spying and working in the intelligence industry is all about like what you know versus somebody else, and that's all leverage, right? Like your ability to lie and your ability to tell people mistruths and your ability to say, I know this, but I can swap it for this thing is really important. And the fact that inversion exists flips that on its head in this film, like even just for the protagonist as a character, because he's a character who takes calculated risks with people, knowing that like there's a possible outcome. Obviously he's like very early in the film, you see him dive forward and try and take the suicide pill, and that's kind of what gets him sucked into the world because he's the only person willing to take the risk. But there's this moment in the middle where he's kind of tested, right? Like Kat has been captured by Andre, and they're on the flip side of two walls, and one side of the wall is going backwards and the other side is going forwards, and Andre is shouting at him backwards about something, and you can see behind Kat's head the perfect bullet hole in the glass. So you know that he's fired that gun at some point, and you're just waiting for the moment that that rips back through the wall through her head. And the protagonist makes the call to be like, he's not going to do it. He's bluffing. And you just like, it changes the dynamic of like this calculated risk I'm taking. Like, do you make the same choices knowing the outcomes of things? Because he knew that she was going to die there. And actually it's a swerve because Andre stands her up and shoots her in the gut instead. But it looked like she'd been shot in the head. So he kind of knows the outcome. And it's that same thing at the end with Pattinson, where he turns around and he's got the little tag on his back and he realizes that that's the guy that popped up to open the door at the last minute to stop the plot, to kind of send time the wrong way. I can't remember. Like, the plot was whatever the world ending thing was very confusing, but Pattinson basically saves the day at the end of this film. And the protagonist has to make this choice again to be like, I know what happens to you. I'm going to let you go and do that. And, you know, it for a character that's clearly just always taking very calculated risks, these risks are now just horrible choices that he's making, instead of being like, I think I could get away with this. I think I could save this. We can do this. We can keep everyone alive. Like, he clearly cares about his team in the very early going. You know, he's crying when he wakes up from his coma and he's told, did any of my team make it out? I think it's just a very like interesting change in the character. And I would love to see the follow on from it, because you know where his character on the arc is going. Like, you know, he's working for himself, it turns out, in this film. I would love to see that kind of evolution of the protagonist as a character, like as this kind of master puppeteer, knowing everything that happens in time.
That interrogation sequence is so cool in hindsight, because, like, you know, you're watching the film, you're watching that scene, and it's kind of hard to follow a little bit because they're kind of talking through this two-way mirror, this sort of two-way radio thing, and there's a lot of like muffled sound, and obviously a lot of it's reversed and sort of playing out. So you think that you're watching sort of the reverse kind of being. It's really hard to follow. I just sort of struggle with myself. I was like, oh man, I'm picking up on what they're saying, but I'm not sure I'm totally following. But then essentially you just get to watch that scene a second time, but with the other half of the conversation playing forward and also hearing what he is saying. And you're like, oh, so you kind of watch the same scene twice, but it's only one. You do that to get to the full conversation. It's really quite remarkable. And that happens, you know, in that same sequence where you watch an action scene that's got, you know, cars flipping, this, that, and the other. And then you watch that same action sequence again, but from the other angle. Well, and by the other angle, I mean the other time motion. And like all of a sudden, like the whole action scene makes, because there are moments in that first time watching, you were like, whoa, what the hell just happened? I must have missed something. Then you see it a second time, you're like, oh, right, because that's kind of all happening at the same time.
And you know that, like, and that's, you're with, and it's kind of interesting because as the sort of, I think not giving the protagonist a name is kind of brilliant in that scenario, because it's that same sort of thing of just, they might as well just called him Avatar, right? Like, and just be like, you're just going to find this all out at the same time that he does, because you are just in his shoes in the way the film is traveling, and you're watching stuff go past you backwards going, I wonder what that means. And he's watching the same thing sort of going on. And that moment where he drives the car between Branagh's car going backwards and his car from earlier going the other way, and you're like, oh, I didn't even realize he was in, and then stuff happens in the middle. You're just like, it is just mind-boggling the way this film's, and it's some of the most interesting cinematic spectacle I think I've ever watched. Like, it's a great spy movie for one. I think like the setup and all the Twilight dusk call signs stuff is brilliant in the early going. The breaking into the Mumbai penthouse and stuff,
that was wicked.
It's wicked.
The first heist is amazing.
You get the whole scene with a Q explaining how Tenet happened. Like, Tenet happens, the first heist. Yeah, like you said, is brilliant. And that's even before there's any inversion stuff. And then you see that heist again, but backwards, and they're going through the same scene, and in the scene the first time, and you like, I think that's a reveal you can spot a mile coming, like
Yeah,
kind of, it must have been him going the other. As soon as they were on that ship, being like, we're going back there because that's where we've got what they call turnstiles, which are the machines that allow them to reverse their flow through time. But yeah, like, I just think it's fascinating as well, because like, it would have been so easy to be like, okay, well, we'll just pilot a helicopter to where there's a new thing and we'll do that, right? But the fact that because it's subterfuge and it's flying under the radar, they have to get this ship that's going thingy, and they're experiencing that going backwards through time. Like, there's all this
yeah,
sort of genius stuff where like, you don't just see people going forwards through time because you're experiencing it the same way they're experiencing it. They really go to great pains to be like, no, we've done some really cool cinematography here. We've shot a load of stuff backwards, so you're going to get the benefit of seeing that happen. Like all these gulls flying backwards. He steps in a puddle and it all reverses, and that that when he first walks outside of the facility, having been inverted, and you see like, obviously John David Washington does a brilliant job of being like moving backwards but clearly moving forwards. Like, it is honestly just flabbergasting to watch this film.
yeah.
It's so clever.
I can't wait to see it again. To be honest, I
Yeah.
really cannot wait to see it again, and possibly even more than that, because I think it is a sort of film that requires multiple watchings in the same way that Inception was, and it's kind of that's the genius of Nolan. Really, he makes movies that are designed to be watched multiple times and to get something new out of it each time. So yeah, big recommendation from me. I think it's going to do. I'm hoping that it does really well. At the box office as well, because I think that sort of cinemas kind of could do with that real big injection. I think cinema as a whole could do with that big injection and a big movie that does really well to kind of like install the confidence for other movies to kind of get back in. Because when I was in the pictures and they were showing trailers beforehand, as you said, they showed the trailer for Bond, they showed the trailer for Black Widow and for Wonder Woman 84, and I was like, oh man, I'm it's so good to be back in the cinema watching a film like this.
Yeah, and I think it's very brave of Warner and Christopher Nolan to be like, let's put Tenet out as the first one, because like, who else was there to put out their first film? Marvel has a film in the bag. Bond's been in the bag for a very long time, and it's like, this is the spy film that came out first. Interestingly, and I do think this is a film that really benefits from being seen in the cinema, because those action scenes, like I said, are some of the most interestingly framed set pieces I think you've ever seen. And like, when you're watching a film, you're like, how did they do that? And you go, oh, wires and CG. This is even more confusing because there's no ability to have done any of the stuff that they've done with where the same scene happens in reverse and forward motion. You just spend your time going, I don't know how it happened. I really don't, and I love, like, I think the more you think about it, the more questions it raises this kind of problem. Like, they stop an apocalypse, but technically the apocalypse already happened, and technically it also didn't already happen. Like, do they know that they've already saved the world if they're already alive like 14 days later? Like, it's so it raises all those questions that like X-Men comics try to answer, but I think manages to navigate them in a way that keeps the fun very high. It manages to sort of like make it feel physically intact, in the sense that like the science seems to balance out as much as possible without your brain just going, oh man, like that.
Yeah.
What's normally the Doctor Who effect of like, why did they do that? Oh, that just hurts. But still like keeps it to bombastic levels. Like, it really is the inversion stuff is to make your jaw drop, and it is only deployed really to make your jaw drop here. No one's going backwards in regular scenes. These are set piece moments, and when they're coming, and when they do, they deliver tenfold.
But that's not the only bit of movie news for you and I to discuss, Mr. Blake, because it was DC Fandom over the last weekend, the weekend just gone, and we got quite a few big trailers out of that. Obviously, we've got the big trailer for the Snyder Cut of Justice League, but we're not going to focus on that one. We're going to focus on the ones going into the cinemas, kicking off with Wonder Woman 84, which I thought was a good trailer. Like, I don't think it didn't progress much from the first one that we saw, which felt like ages ago that we saw that first trailer. But we did get to see the first look at Kristen Wiig's Cheetah, which was quite cool.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think the sort of vibe they're going for this, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, this looks more like I mean, the first one was very comic booky, but the first one at least had sort of like the war was going on, and it had this kind of
Hmm.
feeling of being a bit more of a war movie. This feels like it's if the move is to 1984, this feels very much like it's about like bombastic colors and comic bookiness. It's leaning into that sort of 80s action movie trope here. What I do love about this film, this trailer, and what it showed is the sort of flip reverse of the relationship between Chris Pine and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, in the fact that, like, you know, in the first film, she was the fish out of water. She'd been secluded
Yeah.
on an island for most of her life, and then came out into the world and had to sort of learn to experience it. And now here in 1984, she's the one who knows what parachute pants are, and he's the one that doesn't. I just think that that will be an interesting dynamic to play up, because it's like the two roles are reversed. And yeah, I can really see this film. And actually, do you know what? Like, Kristen Wiig's, like, her character has a really interesting arc as well, from the looks of this trailer. Like this kind of like, you know, basically Wonder Woman is like the alpha woman. She's the finest example of womanhood that you could possibly have. She's the strongest, she's the fastest, she can whip lightning, apparently. Like, she can do it all. And then you've got somebody who's a little bit dowdier, a little bit more put upon, like reaching to achieve that level of greatness and clearly falling short
Hmm.
emotionally rather than physically. Like, I think that's really fascinating and interesting, and that I think that dynamic could play out really, really well in the film.
Yeah, and we're going to get to see that very soon as well, because that'll be out in cinemas before the end of the year. But coming out next year, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. So you and I talked a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago. We thought that we're going to get kind of like our first look trailer at DC Fandom, but what we got in the end was sort of like a behind the scenes look featurette, which was very cool, but also this kind of this bizarre trailer that is all about, this is the cast we've got. These are the silly costumes we've put them in. Please come and see our movie.
I love it. I like, you know, this is because this is what the Suicide Squad is, right? Like, this is, they are the Expendables of the DC universe. They are the, you know, the sort of B tier villains that you can kill off for a joke or for a laugh or on a life or death mission. Like, that was the point. And actually, like, that original squad in the first Suicide Squad film just makes it through mostly intact. Like, you know, like, it's that's not the point of the group. The point of the group is like, yeah, there's a couple of big hitters in there, and the stakes are really high for, like, you know, if you kill Harley Quinn, I'm sure like people are going to be pretty upset, but you can kill Polka Dot Guy, like, you know, you're like,
Exactly. Yeah.
you,
That so many of these are not making it through to the end of the
and that's
movie.
what's brilliant, though, because then you're kind of doing what, you know, Deadpool did this joke with X Force, technically, in the film, where he assembles that X Force and they all accidentally blow away in the wind. You know, but the Suicide Squad is designed for that purpose, and he's got some really good big name. Like, he's got some really fun family, like actors that people are going to be really keen on. Like Nathan Fillion, I'm really keen to see what Nathan Fillion will do in this role. And like, John Cena's in
I
there.
was going to
Like,
say John
is
Cena.
John Cena going to make it through?
Playing Captain America, basically playing this character called the Peacemaker, who is 100% designed to be a Captain America
Yeah.
piss take.
So into peace that he's willing to fight anybody for it. Like, it's so good.
It's great, yeah. And what a cast it as well. You know, Michael Rooker's in there, Joel Kinnaman returning, as along with Margot Robbie and Jai Courtney from the first movie, which is, it's kind of a sequel, but also not. But yeah, we've got Sean Gunn in there as the Weasel, Nathan Fillion, Peter Capaldi as the Thinker, Steve Agee, David Dastmalchian, or his name I can never remember, but he was the really funny one from Kurt from Ant-Man, and Michael Rooker from sort of Guardians World as well. So yeah, I mean, I love James Gunn movies, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a blast. Really,
Yeah,
looking
I
forward to
think
that.
it's a blockbuster that's, you know, at least got a very different vibe to a blockbuster. And I think, you know, we were talking about how Guardians of the Galaxy was great because it was clearly a Marvel movie, but it existed kind of outside the regular world of Marvel, being about people from space. But it was also about this really misfit group of people where one of them's a raccoon and one of them's a tree. And, like, you know, like 5 years ago when that happened, everyone thought that was mental. and now we're all just like really on board with like, we love Groot, we love Rocket. And James Gunn made those characters. What's interesting here is that I'm hoping he's going to make us really care about these characters, and then something horrible happens to them. And I'm sure there's a few expendable ones in there that are there for jokes as well. But yeah, it's about who comes out alive from this crazy mission. And it's probably going to allow James Gunn to play up to his more madcap sensibilities. Whereas I felt like Guardians was perhaps reined in slightly by needing to play into the much grander narrative of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
But the biggest trailer for my money that was released over DC Fandom, and the one that I think has got most people talking as well, was this trailer for The Batman, which will be out next year, directed by Matt Reeves, who did the, I think, criminally underrated Planet of the Apes trilogy. Like, people loved it when it came out, but no one talks about those films anymore. And I was like, every now and again, I'm like, Matt Reeves directed a perfect trilogy of movies, and no one cares anymore, which is a real shame. But he is put together here what for my money, is the most interesting Batman movie, least most interesting looking Batman movie since Batman 89, because 89 was the one that, kind of put Batman out on the map in sort of like the cinema world. Tim Burton made a big splash with that. Batman Returns was kind of more of the same. Returns and Robin were the movies that the studio wanted. And then Nolan kind of took Batman and was just like, I'm going to take him out of the comic book world and put him into the real world and kind of make my sort of like, gritty movies, which a lot of people liked. I think are pretty good as well. I love Batman Begins. And then we saw them go back into that sort of comic book world for the Batman v Superman and Justice League. So you've had, 30 years worth of Batman movies here, and a lot of Batman movies. So it's fascinating to see Matt Reeves has got a new take, a take that we've not seen on the big screen yet for the Batman character. And it's the most excited I've been about a Batman movie in a long, long time.
Yeah, this has got that kind of feeling, almost like it could be a continuation of Batman Begins. Because I think, like, obviously, Batman 89, Tim Burton's Batman, like, cemented Batman as a blockbuster event, I think. And that's what everyone was expecting when a new Batman movie came out. They were expecting there to be toys and merchandise and some sort of deal with McDonald's. And, then that kind of fell over at some point when Batman and Robin was dreadful, and they sort of had to stop doing that. And then Christopher Nolan got the character many years later and got a chance to do something different with it. But he still very much framed it as the heroic side of Batman versus the villains of Gotham. And maybe the villains of Gotham were slightly more toned down from what they were originally. But I think Batman was still very much a comic book character. This looks like it's exploring the idea of Batman. And what I think is the best bit of Batman, it's not the pointy ears, it's not the Batmobile, it's not even the kung fu stuff. It's the world's greatest detective, Luke. Yes, I want to see him do some goddamn detecting, because this looks like Batman further along in his career than I think we've ever seen him in cinema, really. Like, well, especially in the Christopher Nolan films. Like this is a Batman who is seemingly got a good relationship with Gotham PD, and there's the bat signal will be turned on and that kind of stuff. He's being let into crime scenes to have a look around and interacting with Gordon. That's like one of the iconic relationships of comic books, Batman and Gordon. Like it'd be good to see them actually have proper screen time and be working together on stuff. It makes perfect sense if Paul Dano is the Riddler and that's the villain, because Batman flexing his best muscle, his brain, is the stuff I really want to see. And Nolan skirted around the detective work stuff with a lot of pseudo technology and things like that. I think there wasn't as much down to earth police work. But Batman, there have been brilliant Batman stories that are essentially a police procedural. And I'm hoping, because this film doesn't look like it's being pitched as a blockbuster to me. Like that trailer said this is Batman doing Saw, or Batman doing Zodiac or something, this is Batman doing down honest to goodness police work, Luke. And that's what I'm here for. I am here for that.
You made a really interesting point there, is that we sort of saw later in his career Batman in Batman v Superman and Justice League, but there wasn't enough time to really dive into that, because there was also a Superman in Batman v Superman, and there was also the whole Justice League in the Justice League, so we never really got that time to focus on that era of Batman, this one who's actually got that relationship with Gordon and everything. It was very surface level stuff. Whereas here, we're going to get to see a full movie of that with none of the other bells and whistles around to distract it. This is just Batman doing a detective movie. I'm so excited to see Jeffrey Wright as Gordon. Like, what a cool Gordon, because Jeffrey Wright's wicked. He's a great actor. He's got a cool voice, got a cool presence about him. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him as Gordon. Andy Serkis as Alfred. Like, it's a really Zoe Kravitz as the Catwoman. Like Catwoman is in this movie, but I'm so excited to see how all of this plays out. Like I'm really into this. We didn't even talk about the fact that Penguin's in this movie as well, with Colin Farrell. So yeah, I'm really excited for this.
Yeah, and I think I think it's interesting because there've been stakes in, Christopher Nolan's Batman films certainly had stakes for Batman, but this seems like everything the Riddler is doing is targeted directly at the Batman. This is a game of wits, whereas I think the Joker's was a game of, well, I'm happy to pull the trigger, so are you going to stop me? And yeah, I just think it's going to be interesting to watch what seems like a smaller drama play out in that sense. Like the stakes are lower in terms of like the overall populace potentially of Gotham City who are going to be affected. But that means that every single victim is much more personal to you as a viewer and probably to Batman. So I'm really excited to see that kind of, I think some of the best stuff they ever do is when they focus in on like, what's really going to push Batman's buttons. And, like Scott Schneider's Death of the Family and all that kind of stuff were genuinely brilliant like bits of character work, and that was the Joker. But I think the Riddler's got the potential there to really put people in tricky situations that Batman's going to have to work out how to get them out of. And hopefully there are some of those similar choices like Saw, which it's you can either save them and have to sacrifice this other thing instead, or they can die. Your choice.
Yeah,
up to you,
exactly.
Batman. Let's see how you deal with this one, mucker.
A brilliant choice of character as well, because it's one we haven't seen since Batman Forever on the big screen as well. And I don't think people look back on that film particularly fondly. As much as we all loved Jim Carrey at the time, and I know I do. I still think that Batman Forever is pretty decent, but people don't look back on it. They don't. That's not the Riddler that they want. And so I think that Matt Reeves is the perfect villain choice here to go with the Riddler, because it feels new. Even though it's been done before. So yeah, so I'm really stoked about this movie. I think it's going to be, it's the most exciting. When they announced they were doing another Batman movie, like I was texting my friends about this, being like, oof, I am struggling to get enthused about another Batman movie. But you know what? I'm excited about it. I've watched this trailer a couple of times now, and like, yeah, I'm sold. Love Matt Reeves. Really excited for this.
The key is that, like, I think Batman's timeless as a character, right? Like, Batman is kind of an immovable object. For some reason, he's still cross about his parents, and he's going to dress up as a bat and kick your butt about it. But it's about what you throw in his path. And I think the Riddler in this form hasn't been chucked in his path before. And, and also, like, it feels like a choice that Christopher Nolan would have made for a Batman film. Like, it feels like a reimagining of a character that's very grounded as well. Like, it's not... the Riddler isn't Jim Carrey prancing around, basically being Jim Carrey in green, and not the mask, obviously. But like, yeah, this just feels like a sensible villain that is could happen in the real world. So it is like skewing close enough to reality and has just enough comic book flavor to it to really give Batman a proper test. And yeah, I think the test here is going to be a game of wits, and I am super stoked to see Batman actually do some detective work.
It'd also be really nice to watch a Batman movie where someone doesn't have to do a silly voice, because we've heard Robert Pattinson's Batman voice. He's just doing a gruff voice. That's all you need to do. You don't need to be Christian Bale like, or like with Ben Affleck. With Ben Affleck with the sort of voice modulator thing. No, you just need to do what Michael Keaton did. Just do a gruff voice, mate.
Yeah. Be vengeance.
But that is all we've got time for this week on What's On at Cineworld Cinemas. Thank you so much for watching. Please do give this channel a subscribe and book your ticket for the movies that we have discussed on this show using the links in the video description down below. I have been Luca, and this has been Laurie Blake, and that was Cinematic Movies.